And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the final lecture on the final module. Doesn't it feel nice? Almost done with me. I'm almost out of your lives. You can kick me to the curb and don't have to worry about it anymore. I thought we'd go out on a high note with regulations. There we go. There's a technology failure there on my part. So, long-term care, elder care, really probably should have put a slash in there, but is subject to lots of regulations. Many, many, many regulations. I have heard, I don't know how to test this theory, I've always wanted to. I have heard that the most regulated industry in America is nuclear power, and the second most regulated is elder care. I don't know that that's true, but it kind of wouldn't surprise me. It is, again, it's subject to lots and lots of regulations. It's federal regulations, state regulations, maybe, city, county, local level regulations, maybe. So, how does this all work? All right, I think I mentioned this earlier, but we'll talk about it again real quick here. Nursing homes were not a great place prior to this point. Some of them were, some of them weren't. It was very easy to take advantage of people in nursing homes, I guess is how I should say that, and kind of just put somebody away. And this was not just fiendish nursing home owners, this was also fiendish family members. It would just put them away. It would put someone in a nursing home. They would then, bilk them out of their money. Just forget about them. The care in some of these places was terrible, and so eventually, the federal government stepped in to fix this. I'm going to try very hard to make this not political. It's very hard to talk about federal regulations and state regulations and not be not be political. But I'm going to do my best. So, in OBRA 87, as I said, this is the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1987, is when they made the big federal regulations for nursing homes. And they'd kind of questioned, like, how do we legally do this? Never mistake the fact that the government can choose to do something if it wants to. It has the power to do that. But they were like, so how do we do this, legally and not get ourselves in hot water about it? So what they eventually decided on was that they're paying for it. They're paying for some of this care. And so because of that, they're like, we get to stipulate what we're paying for and what our expectations are. So that's how this came about. You'll notice that some of these, Medicare, Medicaid, nursing home reform, it's a little bit different. Vaccine compensation. So it's a strange kind of combination, but that's how they set up the legal framework for this. Here's the legalese for it. I'm not going to read all this. You can pause if you'd like to and read it. We'll talk about it as we go forward. So there are levels of control in this. The federal level is the minimal baseline requirements. That is, you can't, this is the way these things always are structured, right? The federal law is the law of the land most of the time. Now, if you in the state want to get stricter than that, you may. You absolutely may. Most of the time, a state may make a stricter law than a federal law, and there are, of course, differences of opinion on in what way and how, and we're not going to go into that. In this case, the minimal level of acceptable care to provide is the federal baseline. States may be more strict, and local governments may be more strict than that. A good example of this is in sanitation. There's a federal minimum level of sanitation required in food service. The state of Texas has a higher one called TFER, Texas Food Establishment Regulation Codes. Those are more strict than the federal guidelines. Then you also have, at least in Texas, we have local either city or county health departments that regulate food establishments. So we have to follow the federal regulations, the state regulations, the local regulations. Federal is the minimum. The state can and does, in this case, have stricter rules. The city can, and in this case does, in my city, have stricter rules than the state guidelines. The way this actually works on a day-to-day basis, right? The federal government makes the baseline mandates. The way they actually made this work is, or the way that it functions, I should say, is the same way Medicaid functions, which is the federal government looked at the states and said, you guys do it. So state teams are the ones that actually enforce the regulations. Occasionally, they do have one. There is a team called a FOSS team, which is Federal Oversight Support Survey, which is a survey team that comes and assesses the state surveyors to make sure they're maintaining federal standards. And I have had the distinct honor of being in 2 FOSS surveys, and heaven help you if your facility gets caught in one, because they are rough. The typical, we'll go into how this works later. A typical standard survey will find 0 to 4-ish violations. The last time I had a FOSS survey, my facility in that case had 17 violations, one of which was there was too much pigeon poop in the courtyard, which kind of, I actually thought that the administrator was going to flip her, to just like literally lose her mind. She had this really unhealthy cackle about that and said, "What would you like me to do? Post signs for the pigeons?" But yeah, so there is federal oversight of the states. Typically, it's a state survey team that comes in and does it. So, and I will put links to these here. All of this is, public record and public information. I will put a table that divides this that you're seeing here. The topics of concern are grouped by number and code into like subtopics. So, for example, 483.60 is food and nutrition services, and then there's 486.61, 483.61, 483.62. Each one is a different point to look at. 483.25 is quality of care. 483.35 is the beginning of nursing services. So there is a spreadsheet for that, and I'll put a link to that for you. Also, I'll put a link for, if you remember when I was talking about care planning, and I said it's important to understand the PES statements. And again, I'll remind you, the PES statement is the one thing I'm going to require for Unit 4 assignment and for the final nutrition care plan. You need a PES statement because it specifically talks about looking for a PES statement and how to read an ADIME in the surveyor's guidelines. That's why I push that point, is because they know to look for that. So if something goes wrong, if a facility gets a violation, it's called an F-tag. And an F-tag also has a numeric code, which specifies what scope of practice was violated and how. For example, here I have F803 is a failure to, remember when I said that a dietitian needs to evaluate menus? F803 is either that the facility doesn't have a menu that's been validated by a dietitian, or it's been found to be not sufficient. Another example is F812. I don't have that one on there. F812 is a sanitary kitchen environment. F692 is EN hydration status. This is not the physical application of IV fluids or enteral or an EN tube. This is the patient meeting nutritional needs through the hydration, through IV and enteral feedings, right? So it's not were they placed correctly, it is the prescription correct? So this one would be a dietitian tag. There is also one that is like, was the IV poorly placed? Is it not running correctly? That's a nursing tag. You may also hear about K-tags, which is a separate organization within the state. Actually, I believe it's federal. I know it's in Texas. I think it's federal. K-tags are physical building violations. Is there not enough lighting? Are the smoke walls ineffective? Do the doors not seal correctly? Things like that. They're similar to F-tags. It's just a different organization that oversees them. When you are in a facility that receives an F-tag, it's kind of important to note that the way that facilities run, every facility, not just long-term care ones, almost all of them involve more than one discipline, but some lucky person gets to get the blame for this. So, you may have, there's a tag for our diets being met, our correct therapeutic diets being met. Now, you could have a server for in the dining room that takes a meal out to a diabetic that is not diabetic, and that could be considered a violation of that tag. Now, that's not really the kitchen's fault, because the kitchen had the food ready. They had the correct thing. The nurse or universal worker or whoever brought it out. It could be the administrator, who knows. Whoever put that plate down there grabbed the wrong one. They're actually the one that messed up, but the FNS team is going to take that's Food Nutrition Services, if you haven't heard that one. We used to call them dietary, now we call them FNS. The FNS team is going to take the hit on that one. Just how it goes. So after an F-tag has been established, the severity is established as well. This has also been changed recently. It used to be that you would get an IJ was the most severe, which meant immediate jeopardy. They changed it to a letter code now, so they'll say, F 212 A severity level, which is no actual harm. It's isolated, no actual harm with potential for minimal harm. This would be frequently this is something like a nurse didn't knock before they entered and announce themselves before they entered a room. All the way up to immediate widespread jeopardy. Like I said, they used to be called an IJ, now it's called an L. And I have seen buildings closed down for this, and I'm not being facetious about this. They have said, this place is dangerous. You have 72 hours to find new places for all of these residents to go. This building is being closed down. That's one of the reasons, if you're in long-term care, why surveys are scary, because the survey team has the ability to close the building. That's very rare, but I want to emphasize, I have seen that happen. It wasn't my building, by the way. It was just, it was another one. They can stop funding. They can fine. So, based on the severity, it's pretty tense while they're there. So, if you are found to be in violation of something, you have to make a plan of correction. You have a limited amount of time. You have a set amount of time. So, let me back up. The state finds a violation, and they have a set amount of time to serve you with what's called a 2567. You don't really need to know that. I'm not going to ask you what a 2567 is, but that is the formal layout of these are the things we think are in violation. The building then has 10 days to make a plan of corrections. The plan of corrections it's a facilities plan to fix the violations that were noted. It has very specific parts. It has to include any residents identified that were harmed, residents, you have to identify the residents that could be harmed. You have to identify corrective actions taken. So what did you do right then when state said, this is bad, this needs to be fixed? What did you do then? What systematic changes have you put in place to prevent it from occurring again? And what processes have you put in place to identify if this problem develops again? All of that needs to be submitted to the state, and they need to approve it. Now, interestingly, because this is America, and if there is one right that we have that's not enumerated that does exist, is the right to sue. And there is in every state, because the federal government lets the states handle this, every state has a different method of doing this. In Texas, it's called an IDR, which is an independent dispute resolution. You can argue this point. You can say, I think you guys are in error. And it used to be a department within the state. Eventually, it was decided that this wasn't really very fair to have the state having to decide if the state was right. So it went to a third party kind of arbitration. Both sides present their case to a third party arbitrator, and then they decide, do they uphold it? Do they discard it? Do they change the severity? They can do that. They can say, yes, the building was an error, but it's not as bad as the surveyors made it out to be. I'll actually say, just toot my own horn a bit. One of my proudest personal, professional moments was that I fought the state on a sanitation tag for a kitchen and won. So, I mean, it is possible. But, weirdly, you still have to make corrections. You have to make your plan of corrections while you're doing your dispute. Typically, if you are in a dispute and say you're found in civil liability for something, and you say, I disagree and I'm appealing that. A lot of times there's a stay on whatever the court has decided to do while it's being appealed to the next level. You don't get that option in regulatory compliance. You have to turn in that plan of corrections within 10 days, whether or not you're appealing it. So almost every plan of corrections has a form at the beginning that says, we're doing this because we're required to by law. This is not admission of guilt. This is not saying we agree with you. We reserve the right to dispute these at any point. We're just doing this because we have to. And as I said earlier, why is this so stressful to people? The state may assess penalties for FTAGs. And these include ending funding through the fines. These include ending funding to fines. They also can include, if something is severe enough, just closing the building down. Again, that's rare. I have seen it happen. It is rare. There are a couple things that can be done there. If it's severe enough and it's been repeated, they've had repeated violations of the same violation, the state can just say, we're not paying for this because you're not doing it. Now, the facility still has to do it. Just because the state has stopped paying, as long as you're keeping the residents, you still have to provide that care. Obviously, you can't just stop feeding them. But you're not going to get paid for it while you do it. The state can also issue fines, and they tend to do this if they have a repeat violation. The magic number is typically 3 times in a row. If you have something 3 times in a row, they can back fine you from the time that the first violation was noted. So, for example, say a building has been found to have infection control issues 3 times in a row. The state can say, we are fining you $5,000 a day for infection control issues, and we're starting back in on your first violation. So you already have 3 years of $5,000 a day violations and fines to pay, because the argument is you clearly haven't taken this seriously. You haven't fixed it. Now, this might seem reasonable, but for a lot of the ones that get repeat tags, they're very broad, and they cite the tag, not the infraction. So, for example, let's use kitchen sanitation, which is another one that gets hit a lot. Say one time somebody didn't wash their hands correctly. So the building did an in-service on that, went over everybody washing their hands. So you do it, we're going to sign off on this. We're going to do regular testing on this to make sure you're still doing it. We're going to be monitoring you. And then the next year, the survey comes. Hand washing is just fine, but somebody hasn't dated or labeled something correctly, which is another requirement. That's also an 812. So now you've got two completely different issues, but your facility now has two. Say you fix that. Now you're washing hands and you're dating things, and you come in and then they find, pick another thing. Lids on trash cans is a requirement for sanitation. There aren't lids on trash cans. So now there's 3 in a row that you have that all are completely unrelated to each other, except that they fall under the heading of 812. You have 3 812 infractions. The state can, at this point, say, we're fining you for the 3 years. This has been argued for a long time. Building administrators feel this is exceptionally draconian. I can kind of see their point. On the other hand, also, we're talking about living people that are dependent on you to do the right thing. I see both sides of this, legitimately. It's just, for those of you who are interested in long-term care, just know that regulations and surveys are a fact of life that you deal with. And, ladies and gentlemen, we are done. I want to thank you for the semester. This has been a great semester. I appreciate all the feedback I got from you on the surveys. I've enjoyed working with you. The discussion groups are awesome. I wish you guys all the best. I think you're going to be great. And hopefully geriatrics is something that's caught your interest a little bit, because we could always use we could use more good people in geriatrics. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you guys later. Bye.